So much pressure was on Shxrk last year. The expectations were so high, and after getting second 3 times in the final reboot round, making it so he couldn't qualify to Major 3 or Globals, he has been on an absolute tear ever since. Now, he just qualified for the Esports World Cup, where him and T3eny placed first in the first qualifier, and he's looking like one of the best players in the world right now. But how exactly did him and T3eny do this? One thing about their strategy in Reload is that they use the Flowberry Fizz better than any other team I have seen in the early game, mid game, and end game. In the early game, they landed Dirty Docks and Loot Up, where both players try and find a full Flowberry Fizz to carry. Shxrk and T3eny tank a lot of zone and stay in Dirty for a while in the early game to loot up, as they are looking to avoid early game fights in these stacked lobbies, and all of the Slurp barrels and Slurp trucks around Dirty Docks allow them to do this. Then, when the zone has a far pull right before the 4th zone, they Fizz high pad and fly to the dead side of zone where they dive straight down and are able to avoid any mid-game conflict. You're gonna have to trust me that this is the dead side since the map function is broken in Reload replays right now, but it is, trust me. They did this exact same rotate in Game 2 and Game 7, where they got 3rd and 1st respectively, setting them up in a great position for the mid-game. Avoiding players in the mid-game is really important in Reload. So many players were W-king in the mid-game in this tournament, especially near the end of the tournament where teams were desperate for points. So, rotating like this set them up to have a really strong endgame and play out their game plan perfectly. A lot of people think that positioning isn't quite as important in Reload, but Shxrk and T3eny show this clearly isn't the case. The next application of Fizz that they use is for mid-game rotates. Shxrk and T3eny are on the dead side in the 7th game here, and they just wrap all around the edge of zone using the Fizz to move faster. They jump up into a bunch of old builds and use one of the shockwaves to launch them over this team and make it down the hill. Again, when the 7th zone pulls, they continue to tap Fizz and run on the edge of zone instead of using movement unnecessarily here, and find a good place to shockwave all the way to zone here while other teams are focused on rotating, and more likely to look at teams more in the center of zone. They then look to take a higher layer in the 8th zone, but don't try and play height even if it's open here, which I will talk more about later. In this situation on the dead side of zone here, most players would probably try to Fizz shockwave or Fizz crash pad through the middle of zone, but Shxrk and T3eny are able to save their movement items and remain undetected by hugging the edge of zone here on dead side before making it to another uncongested side of zone. The final application of Fizz that they're really good about using is when they're on the high ground in the endgame, they always have the Fizz effect active, even if they're not actually looking to heal any shield. There is a really smart reason for this though. Because shockwaving for height is so strong, you need to make counterplay so that people can't just take height from you like this. To counterplay this, Shxrk and T3eny play height on a really high layer so that A, their builds don't get shockwaved out from players trying to take height from them, and B, players also wouldn't be able to shockwave up and build over them or shoot them by doing this. A new problem arises though, that from playing height so high up, you are at risk of getting shot out or dying to fall damage and not being able to reconnect since there's no other layer near you. Well, to counter this, Shxrk and T3eny are constantly tapping the Flowberry Fizz on height, so they constantly have the effect. This way, they aren't at risk of dying to fall damage if anyone makes a play on height, and they don't have to try and scramble with shockwaves or crash pads to save themselves. They are just always prepared for this. Back to the early game though. Shxrk and T3eny don't look for a lot of early game fights as I mentioned in these tough pro lobbies. The circumstances that they do look for a fight is if they're able to create an advantage state. If you watch my video about Peterbot and Pollo, you would know isolating players and pushing advantages is key in Reload strategy, and the same is true with Shxrk and T3eny. In the mid game, they are crouching in a building looking for a lurk play, and they notice Darm shockwave toward the supply drop nearby. Crucially, they notice that not only did he shockwave over by himself, but he left his tops open on the drop to catch it. So, Shxrk throws a shockwave down and they use the one shock strat to land on Darm here. Shxrk pumps him in midair, places a stair, and slides using his momentum to put himself in a position to take Darm's floor and cone above him, and double edits to get the kill while T3eny is already able to get in. There was no way Darm would be able to react to this, especially when Shxrk is able to perfectly piece him since he left his tops open. Darm is literally fully pieced and killed within 3 seconds of first being shot. There was nothing he could do here. They then notice Darm gliding in again later and jump on him knowing it's more free kill points. Here, in another early game fight they get into, they notice a player gliding back in after being killed. They know this is a big sign they will have an advantage in this fight. So Shxrk shockwaves in and tags the freshly respawned player. He shifts his focus to Sato though, since he knows he is the real threat here, as he realizes that Momsy was the player who had just respawned. Shxrk places himself on Sato's wall here with a stair, and Sato thinks he'll be able to piece Shxrk up, but Shxrk is a step ahead of him and takes his sidewalls, where he sets up for this really nice stair peek here. This stair peek is crucial for any good player in 2026, as it is generally the optimal way to fight in a box when you have the middle stair, as it doesn't put you in a 50-50 50-50 situation. Shxrk then edits out the right wall that he previously took and is able to trade with Sato, which he wants to do since he has the health advantage. He notices Momsy is below him, and him and T3eny are able to take him down since he has nothing, forcing Sato to shockwave away here. Although this wasn't a solo they pushed, Shxrk used his strong fighting fundamentals to keep Sato away while he was able to kill Momsy. Moving more into the mid game, Shxrk and T3eny have a really strong strategy to make it deep into the mid game with smart positioning. In the 7th and 8th zones, as I mentioned earlier, they are looking to play a higher layer here when they rotate. The reason they do this is because the low ground is more likely to have a lot of players in these earlier zones, so by being on a higher layer, they avoid a lot of chaos. Also, normally in these zones in normal competitive battle royale, someone might be looking to play height at this point, but because of shockwaves and how the reload zones work, teams generally don't look to play height this early. Normally, you have to worry about getting sprayed from second height, but since nobody really tries to play early height and reload, getting on these higher layers in the early endgame allows you to gather more information on the lobby with better sight lines. While Shxrk and T3eny generally do like to play on the high ground, that isn't the play they look for generally after making it to the 8th or 9th zone. Normally, they will shockwave from their higher layer to the front of zone here and try and play the low ground. Look here at this play. They shockwave to the front of zone and end up way in front of zone. They don't panic here though. This was planned, as they throw a med mist down and claim a ton of space on low ground and wait for the zone to pull to them. They do this many times, where they shock to the front of zone and tank some zone so they can claim a ton of space and don't have to worry about being cut off by other players. Another strength of playing low ground like this and claiming space is that you can avoid a lot of the chaos and reload endgames. Because there are so many players alive in really small zones, often with a lot of mats left, claiming space on low ground helps you avoid a lot of fighting, and actually sets you up to get a lot of easy refreshes. Look in this example here. Shxrk and T3eny claim so much space on the low ground and then look to spray Ping and Kiro down here. Because they claimed all of the space, there is no way for Ping and Kiro to build to protect themselves, and they try and shockwave away, but not before Shxrk is able to open the edit and get a kill onto Ping before being launched into zone due to the shockwave. Later in this game, they show another strength of low ground. When you're low on mats, you often go to the low ground to rat around, and because of this, if someone has claimed a lot of builds on the low ground like Shxrk and T3eny did here, they can easily edit and kill you for your siphon mats as they do here to Rytex. In Game 7, they play the low ground perfectly here. They shock from a high layer in the 9th zone as I was talking about to the front of low, and even though Shxrk hits a build and slows down, he runs into zone where T3eny is med misting so that they claim a lot of space on low ground. With all of these edits, they have so many angles on other players, and when a player shockwaves above them, Multisanti falls into their builds where Shxrk is able to pump him and T3eny can run in from the other angle that was also their builds to get the refresh. This refresh did make it so they weren't able to remain at the front of zone though, so instead of trying to force their way to the front of zone and potentially getting cut off or edited on, they pop a med mist and tank zone, fizz back to full shield, and shockwave to front side. Now, many players would try and take height here when Shxrk builds on height like he does, but he only does this to protect himself and lands at the very front of zone where he's able to claim the low ground again. They look for a kill on backside and again aren't on the front of zone, so instead of tarping, they prioritize getting to the front of low ground as fast as possible by shockwaving to front and are able to cap themselves off with the exotic Chug Jug. Because the zone is so small at this point, full tarping requires less mats, so they don't need to shockwave, and they continue to stay on the front of zone where they wrap around the edge to claim the whole front side. When they're at risk of being edited on from this wood wall and potentially cut off, they double spray the wall while they move to ensure they aren't edited on and continue to tarp on the front of low. Something interesting is that rolling inadvertently buffed low ground, because when you get knocked, you cannot jump or go up, but you're able to roll down to the low ground, and because of this, there's a higher chance that knocked bodies will just end up on the low ground as seen here with Darkos, as it's just a free supply drop for them essentially. They see Minori on their builds on low ground, and are able to get another easy refresh here with all the space they've claimed. They then are able to shockwave onto height with two other teams left to pretty easily win the game by patiently playing height at the end. While Shxrk and T3eny are really good at playing low ground like I mentioned, they don't shy away from playing height if given the chance. In Game 8, they are on the low ground in the 10th zone and decide to tank Storm with the med mist on backside. They shoot at height, then fizz and shockwave up to try and take height. Shxrk makes a really nice play here. Because his shockwave sent him more horizontal than you would want for a height take, while it shot T3eny straight up, he adjusts on the fly. He places a wall in the floor to connect to height and uses the fizz effect to leap up and pump Darm, who is focused on T3eny who built up on height, causing Darm to drop down here from the pressure. They are now in a position to play height here, and as I mentioned earlier, they constantly tap fizz and play a really high layer to counterplay people trying to take height. From here, it's a pretty simple win for them. Connect to any old builds and cheap tarp, constantly spray down, and win the final final 2v1. Here is one last example of their strats on high ground and their smart late height takes. They were playing a high lair for a lot of the endgame and spray Vico off their lair to focus on height. They notice height's not in a great position and T3eny goes up to mess with height with the Fizz shockwave, and when Darm appears on Shxrk's screen to try and fight T3eny, he beams him, causing him to need to drop. They then use their normal strats of constantly tapping Fizz on a cheap tarp, many layers up on height, and spraying down, and make a really clever play here to get a kill onto Prism, where T3eny pumps his top with the Ranger shotgun and sets up Shxrk to spray him with the twin mag, surprising him for easy elim points. They're able to play height with this strategy till the end of the game, where they end up going down in third. What normally makes height so good is that you can conserve mats and regular BR from playing up there. Well, with the chaos and reload, you can't really do that in the earlier moving zones, which is why Shxrk and T3eny prefer to play low ground or a higher layer until at least the 10th zone, sometimes even the 11th zone. Shxrk is looking like one of the best players in the world, and this win cannot go without huge credit to T3eny too, who's been showing up and playing great since duos came back, on controller too. If you want some more analysis on how the best reload pros play, check out this video on Peterbot and Poyo dominating their EWC heat.